Hi, I'm Michelle Fenton, and welcome to the Happitecture podcast. What would it take to develop resilient, sustainable communities? How do we design cities that support our collective happiness? Join me as my guests and I discuss how we can plan, implement, and foster places that allow us to flourish and grow. Welcome to the Happitecture podcast. We are so excited and delighted to have Djaka Blais. She's recognized as a thought leader on equity and philanthropy, advocating for continuous improvement in funding practices to better serve historically excluded communities. Her work is centered around shifting power dynamics, dismantling oppressive structures, and ensuring that marginalized voices and grassroots initiatives have seats at the decision-making table. We are so excited to have Djaka on our podcast today. And we're going to talk specifically about her role as the executive director of the Hogan Society. And her goal there is to lead the efforts that advance the social and political, economic, and cultural well-being of Black communities, mainly through inclusive housing, community-led development, and culturally informed programming. Your mission is to ensure Black communities have ownership over the spaces and systems that shape their lives. And this is a huge mandate, personal mandate, and a beautiful sense of purpose and grounding. And I just wanted to start with what got you here, what brought you to this moment. Often we get a little insight into a moment, whether it's in our childhood or early on in our adulthood. There's a moment that clicks and you're like, yeah, this is what I want to do. This is why I want to do it. What brought you to this?
I think I would say that at the root of what drives me, and I think a lot of folks that I've engaged with, is that the need for a sense of belonging, regardless of where that is, whether it's belonging to a community, to a location, to a family. That deep yearning for belonging is, I think, what has driven me to be involved in a lot of volunteer work over the years. And a lot of my volunteer work actually has been in organizing and helping support the efforts of Black communities specifically. And I moved here from Calgary, so a lot of my work was based in Calgary and Alberta and helping build community in Calgary and recognizing how systemic and historical inequities really impact a sense of belonging for Black communities. In 2020, I joined a group of individuals to form a philanthropic home for Black communities in Canada. So we formed the Foundation for Black Communities, which is a philanthropic foundation focused on Black communities. And then joining Hogan Society was on, I see, focus on building physical homes and community for Black community.
Was that always the mandate of Hogan Society, or do you think your background and your interests and all of your experience kind of shaped where it is now and really empowered Hogan Society to take on bigger and broader roles and a broader mission, really?
Actually, I think the roots of this organization are steeped in like really big dreams. And so if we go back to when in 2015, the city started consultations on to inform the Northeast False Creek Plan and redevelopments that would come as a result of removing the Georgia and Dunsmuir viaducts. And when they were meeting with community, and there was a meeting with Black community members, there was a real pushback from community on, what they saw as as an erasure yet again of the historical presence of a Black community in Vancouver and specifically where those viaducts are. So that's when the Hogan's Alley Working Group was formed, and they worked with the city to inform the Northeast False Creek Plan. And the initial commitment from the city was for a cultural center to be located on that block.
With a little plaque on the front door, as far as I can remember, as a
Yeah,
commemoration.
there's a plaque there now, but like the commitment was for we're gonna have this cultural center because for municipalities that's something kind of within their wheelhouse to do cultural centers. But recognizing then, there's was really smart people around the table that were in these conversations with the city and seeing like the plans that the city had for the rest of the block were to sell it off to developers. So we were going to see really, expensive condos going up around this cultural center. So what are the chances that Black community would actually go and participate and go and take part in this center? So then the push came for the full block and that being held within a community land trust. And I think that kind of dreaming big and being like, it hadn't been done before, but we're going to do it type of attitude, I think is at the root of this organization. And that's why Hogan Valley Society was formed, was actually to negotiate with the city to advance the plans for getting the full block. And then in 2022, just 2 months after I joined the organization, we announced that we had signed that memorandum of understanding with the city of Vancouver to enter into a long-term lease for that block when they removed the viaduct. So I was really inspired by the work that a volunteer board had been able to lead to that point.
Yeah. And I think it's important to reframe that because Hogan's Alley Society is a volunteer board primarily,
Mhm.
certainly at that time. And when you think about the shift from, city, municipality, community being okay with that violent erasure and having policies that supported that erasure and to move the needle so far to the other side where you've actually got an urban impact strategy, it was pretty tremendous. It's pretty tremendous.
Absolutely.
And I think our listeners, one of the things I think why I was excited to have you on the podcast is because it's such an inspirational story. Something that started with such a violent erasure, and act of violence against a full community. And to go to something so joyful and hopeful as the counter to that is pretty amazing. And so I think the inspiration I think that Hogan's Alley Society and the Hogan's Alley Project, Hogan's Alley Block can really be a template for other organizations who may not have a lot of resources to just stand up and say, actually, we want things to be done a little bit differently
Mhm.
and to think big. That's really amazing.
And I think we're constantly challenged, I think, to be thinking bigger and to be using more of like an abundance mindset rather than scarcity, and that this may not be what we have right now, but that doesn't mean that we can't have that in the future or even in the not so distant future, I think is also part. Like we are building for future generations, but we also want to be taking steps for the current generations and making some improvements there as well.
Yeah. I'm kind of going back a little bit on your experience moving from Calgary and doing all that work in Calgary and coming to Vancouver, where certainly the presence of Black community, especially a cohesive Black community, well, certainly in my lived experience, seemed pretty slight. So
Mhm.
I don't know how you can talk to the idea of how important it is to have Black spaces and to have communities for Black people, especially in Vancouver. We're so dispersed over the city. We're so dispersed over BC. And when we think about ownership of spaces, coming together as community, having a physical representation of that, I wonder if you can talk a little bit to how important it is to have ownership over that kind of space, to have a space. Because some people will say, well, you have a Black community, you can have a community center that you can run events here and there. Like, why was it so important for Hogan's Alley Society to say, no, we actually need a block? We actually need a strong physical presence, not just a little community room and a plaque on the door.
Yes. I think it's a few things. One, you talked about your own personal experience, right? I think about Black people who've grown up here or people who have chosen to move here. And a common story is, where are all the Black people? Where can I find, people that can perhaps relate to some of my experience, find the products that will create that sense of belonging for me? Where can I find access to networks and opportunities in a way that is tailored to me? And that comes with a need for actual physical spaces. Yes, we all learned during COVID that we can do some things online, but at the end of the day, we are physical beings that need to move through physical spaces. And we need to have access to spaces where we can come together, we can feel safe and welcomed, we can see ourselves represented. So, even things like having murals where you see Black faces in, a cityscape in a neighborhood that you're walking through, what that does for your psyche to see yourself or someone that somewhat looks like you on those is incredibly powerful. We have amazing organizations actually across Greater Vancouver that are doing really important work for Black community. And a big struggle often is like finding reliable, affordable space that they can access to do this programming or even to have their businesses. But knowing that they can go into that space and that the people that they're working with are feeling welcomed and then they know that they belong in that space. And then actually the space is a quality space, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yep.
why do we have to have our programming in spaces that are like dilapidated, kind of in a basement somewhere? Not that there's anything wrong with like accessing, but we deserve quality spaces that are designed to meet our needs as community. And so that's what we're seeking to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I even go to something as simple as food, because I mean, as a Caribbean woman, food is a central part of my existence. And just like something as simple as having access to a delicious patty,
Yes.
you know, it is pretty much non existent. And so, like you mentioned, the sort of the psychological burden that takes, it's an obvious deficiency, but that deficiency builds and builds and builds, right? Deficiency of food, deficiency of seeing Black faces, deficiency in having quality Black spaces that reflect who we are and our culture. All of those things kind of pile up after a while, and we don't recognize the hurt and the damage that does, not just to a community, but to individuals. And I think to your point of having a physical space that can actually bring all of that together is incredibly important. And I just wanted to address that because I think sometimes people say, well, there's community centers everywhere that's accessible to everybody. And this whole idea of, well, you have access to community centers and meeting rooms here and community meeting places there is not the same thing. We're talking about a repair of erasure and a let's say reclaiming of a community and reclaiming of our power and restoring that power to belong and restoring that power to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And I think that's what the magic and imagination of Hogan's Alley really is about. And, sometimes I get a little bit emotional thinking about what that could be in the future and, all the effort and sacrifice that not just the past residents of Hogan's Alley have made and experienced, but even the community now and the work. I see the work that goes into Hogan's Alley Society. Every time I go to an event, it's just so full of richness and laughter and joy and storytelling and, all the things that kind of make us human. And I think, what a gift it would be, right? And so the question then is, we have all these big ideas, we have maybe a roadmap here and there, but how do we make sure that these efforts of repair are not just symbolic? How do we make sure that they're actually materially impactful? And we're probably going to get into some Arca speak right now because, we are in the Happitecture podcast, but I think you can write a lot about it. You can talk a lot about it. We're talking about it on the podcast, but how do we actually not just pay, face value to it? How do we actually ground this into something material? Which is really the work that you're doing, is taking the talk
Yes.
and implementing it.
Yes. It comes, I think, step by step in different components of the work. And, for example, the first kind of bringing back of Black community members to the block was in opening Nor Hendricks Place, which is a supportive housing modular building. So when BC Housing in the city was planning on opening this modular housing on the block, they approached Hogan Valley Society because we were in conversations with them about the block and had an interest in the block at that time. And so we've been involved in that building since before it opened. Again, it was volunteer board members leading these efforts, and the pushing for a prioritization of Black community members to in that building was a struggle because there
We'll get to
wasn't.
that.
Yeah, but there's that piece, and then we are also looking to actually develop spaces. So we have our first development project underway, and that's where we connected with your firm. And in advancing that development project, it was really important to be not just building another purpose-built affordable housing building that kind of is much needed, absolutely, but that would just kind of look like any other building. We wanted to design something that was first, like, visibly going to speak to Black communities and also be designed in a way in terms of like the unit mix and how spaces are designed to also meet the needs of Black communities, and that being informed by research that we've done with community as well as the consultation that your firm helped facilitate for
Mhm.
us to really dive into what does it mean to have Afrocentric design principles in our context.
Yeah, I would confess that when Hogan's Alley Society approached Cora to do that work, we were scratching our heads because we're like, there is no example here in Canada, certainly in the Pacific Northwest that I'm aware of, that talks about a Pacific Northwest Afrocentric design standard or design aesthetic or design anything. And so we really leaned on the wisdom of community and all that research and work you'd done before to really tease out what was at the core of what does Pacific Northwest or Vancouver Afrocentric design even mean, much less look like. And so I think one of the things I want to get across here is that this is not business as usual. This is not a business as usual enterprise. This is not a business as usual project. This project is really starting to break those barriers down and ask really hard questions about how do we accommodate belonging for people who have been generally, for the most part, left out of the equation. And specifically in Hogan's Alley, erased on purpose. And so it was such an incredible experience to be in that room and listen to the stories and then be able to tease out what it meant to community and then translate that into a set of design standards that was unique to the community. It was such an honor and a gift. And I want to go back to this can be a real incredible model for other communities who are looking to express themselves, be a part of the conversation, have a strong sense of community, and really feel a sense of, when we talk about belonging, we're really talking about psychological security as a baseline, right? And then we get to the joy, and then we get to the thriving, and then we get to all these other things. But really, the psychological safety is, if that's not achieved on the ground level, there's a lot of climbing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, an important part about this work is we are building on work that's been happening in our community for several decades, really. Like
Yes.
there was actually efforts in the late 60s to have a Black cultural center at that point. And, individuals like that were working at that time we're looking to make those dreams come true and build on the efforts that happened. And even like the Hogan's Alley working group going through kind of design charrettes to envision what this block could look like and really diving into like what principles should be informing design for the block. And so those concepts are all things that we're building off of as we continue planning for development of the block, but also other developments that we're working on and interested in advancing across Metro Vancouver.
So I have to ask a question as the architect in the room, and as the architect in the room who, I mean, I've contributed to my share of colonial principles in design work as a profession. What do we need to stop doing as architects and urban planners and designers? And maybe what should we start doing in order to not just dismantle these hierarchies and systems of colonization, but to also create a new narrative, to create something that is not an antithesis, but and. Because let's be honest, Hogan's Alley Society dreams big, but it's one, I would say, the oasis in the desert when it comes to colonization and the representation in the built environment. What do we need to do as architects and designers and planners? What should we stop doing?
Okay. Well, okay. I'll just start off by saying I don't pretend to be an expert in this area. And I think that is maybe something that can be done, that we can do more of or better, is engaging folks that are not, deeply entrenched in this field or in this work, in the actual design and envisioning process, and then looking to non-Eurocentric designs and communities as models more frequently. I think we're very quick to look at North America or at Europe as potential
Yes.
models, but there's like such a rich history around the world that we could build off of and find inspiration from, so thinking more broadly around that. And also, I think just more of a questioning around, when someone says, well, we can't do that because that's doesn't fit with like
Yes.
how things are done.
I know what you're saying. Yeah. No.
Like often our question, I think one of the like things that has worked well for us as an organization is when we don't know something, we'll still ask the question and be like, why, let's do this. And, for example, the garden at Nora Hendricks Place, pushing for it to be designed, our board was pushing for it to be designed through an Afrocentric lens.
Mhm.
And the city was like, well, what does that mean? Like,
Yes.
okay, how would you lead figuring that out? And then we had to figure out what that even meant and
Right.
brought on local Black landscape architect, Divine, and I'm going to forget her last name right now, but Ramesha Designs,
Yes.
to help us figure it out. And so it's that like, okay, just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean that it can't be done.
Yeah. It's like a practice of curiosity, really.
Yes.
That's what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
And creating spaces that are, that there is value in helping people see themselves reflected in a
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. I think, I mean, like I said, the Hogan's Alley Society, the Hogan's Alley Block is really, to me, a model of what can be and a model of something that we can start shaping our built environment better, differently, more appropriately. And I think the question of curiosity and not just accepting the status quo is a linchpin in that discovery process and that rebuilding process. You kind of hinted at the policy side of things, and I know you've been so involved. Hogan's Alley has been so involved in numerous, probably immeasurably numerous conversations with municipalities, policymakers, government agencies. What are their roles in this process of repair? Because we can create design standards, we've created design standards. But if there is not change in the policy in the governance part of it, we're still stuck with a book of design standards, right? And this sort of big idea. And I think policy government agencies have a huge role to play in asking these curiosity questions as well, and or not putting roadblocks up when these questions are asked. So let's talk about your experience in getting certainly the city of Vancouver to listen, and how that relationship and that partnership with the city evolved to create this incredible opportunity.
Mhm.
Like, what is their role? Let's start with what is their role in this process of repair?
Yes. So a lot of that conversations, negotiations, challenging conversations happened before I joined the organization, absolutely. And I think when trying to think about the municipality's role in this redress, first it starts with a I think about that meeting that happened back in 2015 when, community pushed back to say, what you're proposing is a complete erasure of the Black community. You need to do better. And, I think a first step that they did take, I don't know the intricate details of how it all worked out, but ultimately it worked out to a pause in their process, right? And to say, community is really pushing back. We need to stop and listen to what they're saying. And I think we see often from government when there's lip service paid to, consultation or listening, but in actuality, they continue to move forward with the original plan that they had. Willingness to pause and really listen and work together on what can be a new solution, a new possibility is a key part of government. And then being willing to have that flexibility. Governments are the ones that create policy. The policies that they follow, they're the ones that are creating them. So understanding and having that willingness to amend policy, to make exceptions through an equitable lens, recognizing historical inequities that have existed for communities and being willing to act in accordance to redress those. Those are all steps that municipalities can take and that other levels of government can take. And ultimately, like for the work that we've been doing, it's always been this constant push and invitation to government to be willing to do things differently, to show up in relationship differently with communities where historically government has played a very oppressive role and an exclusionary role. And that's what we want to see more of is that willingness to say we're going to sit down at the table and start from a place of yes, and how can we make this work, as opposed to no, this is impossible and we're going to use the same approach for everyone. We're going to be fair, and that doesn't acknowledge the inequities that exist in our society.
Yeah, I think the idea of this is fair. Oh, yes. It's such a dangerous thing, right? Because I think policy in government, certainly from a process standpoint, always touts the idea of, well, it's fair. If you get A, these other people also get A. And again, recognizing that a person A might be different depending on who you're talking to it and the trauma that is coming through that process. And so, the systems of oppression exist in policy, like you say. That's sort of Hogan's Alley got ripped out because of policy, to be really blunt about it. And so the policymakers, yes, they do have a shared responsibility here, however subtle and entrenched these systems of oppression are, like the architect, like the designer, to continue to ask questions. And my hope is that the city of Vancouver, particularly having experienced this collaboration, I wouldn't say collaboration, but relationship with Hogan's Alley, starts to also see a framework that's different than, well, it's just fair. And we're just going to do the same thing we did and create a fair policy for everyone to follow. I mean, we all know that that ends with the same result that we've seen over and over
Yeah.
again, you know?
Well, and I think this is an architecture podcast, and so I wonder, like, how often I have a question for you. Like, how often have you been in spaces in a room where, there's conversations around design of a space, of a building, of an environment, how much diversity is in that space, right?
Yes.
And, like, because I'm thinking about some of the pushback we have already received, and I know we will continue to receive around why should a space be designed for the Black community? That's exclusionary. Are other people going to be welcome there? And the answer is always it's yes, like it's a space that is being designed with the Black community in mind. We're stewarding that space for broader community. And by designing that space, in a way that is considering needs of communities that have historically not been considered in design, then you are creating a space that is more welcoming to all.
Yes.
And often, if we continue with the process where how things have been done, they're not taking into account communities like the Black community that have been historically left out of these planning and design conversations.
Well, I mean, first of all, I've never had a guest ask me a question. I love it. I would say, to your point of diversity in the design room, D, maybe D minus in terms of a grade. Is it getting better? Slightly, marginally, but I would say that it's hard to address a singular issue when we don't address the systemic issue. And for me as an architect, I was trained with a very Eurocentric lens. And so every design room I go into, everyone in that room was trained with a very Eurocentric design lens, or mostly everyone. And so to go back to some of the things we were talking about before, it does take a pause. It does take questioning, and it does take a habit of questioning because these things are so slippery. They're so embedded and they're so entrenched that if you're not careful as a Black female architect, you can also get caught up in it because that is the baseline for which I was told this is what good design, quote unquote, good design looks like. Right. And so my hope is that, well, one of the reasons I started the Happitecture podcast is to bring to light the idea that we don't have to stick to the status quo. We can have diversity in how we design. We can think about design in a different way. We can think about culturally specific design that is not exclusionary. And I go back to the idea of, I have my own dreams about Hogan's Alley, and we'll get to the Hogan's Alley, not the official Hogan's Alley Society dreams, maybe your dreams, but I think when I think about Hogan's Alley and the opportunity to nourish Black joy and Black authorship and Black celebration, I don't see that as exclusionary. I see that as an opportunity to enliven and embrace diversity and embrace joy and embrace all the things that come with creating a space for a group of people, a community to thrive and be joyful in, and how that gives back to the community at large. I think that's the equation I'm looking at, and that's the equation I'm interested in and to talk about creating something for a Black community only, or an Indigenous community only, or an Indian community only. I think that's such a lazy trap, you know, because when you think about any community that's thriving and vibrant and full of life and bringing their full joy, that benefits everyone.
Mhm.
Everyone shares in that joy, not just the Black community. The Black community creates the space for that joy to happen for everyone. So thanks for the question. The other thing, we talk really up at the top of this conversation about belonging and belonging has become like through the process of community engagement, belonging became a big cornerstone. And then when we shaped the design standards, the idea of how do we create and form that belonging in these design standards, it comes up a lot, not just in the work we did with Hogan's Alley, but the work we've done with the downtown Eastside community. Belonging becomes a really key center for how we address communities, thriving communities. How do you think Hogan's Alley Society, generally speaking, I know we talked a little bit here and there, but generally speaking, is Hogan's Alley Society rewriting the script of what it means to create frameworks and places for belonging?
Mhm.
It's a big role to take on.
Yeah.
But do you think Hogan's Alley Society, as a volunteer organization, you know, can rewrite that script?
I think so. I think we are part, and what we want to be part of is a larger movement to do that. And so, for example, we're part of a movement of Black-led community land trusts across Canada and connecting in with others in the US as well that are also trying to work towards Black community ownership over spaces and stewardship of spaces in a way that meets the needs of our communities, and doing that in a variety of ways. And often the conversations we're having are, there's models for governance, for example. There's models for, you know, developing buildings and all sorts of things, but the models don't always quite fit, right? So that trying to pull from different examples, different sources, and then just taking the time to even just sit there and dream and think about what is possible and create is a key part of the work that we're doing. And I think our organization, we're definitely a leader in that, and we're part of a larger movement of organizations that are doing that as well. And we want to be part of a broader ecosystem of organizations that are doing that, because we can't do it alone. And there's so many different interests, and seeing more and more groups that are, like the creativity that comes with like the diversity of perspectives, I think is really inspiring and helps to keep us motivated to keep the work going.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of heavy lifting, but hopefully the idea of community and storytelling and coming together and being in a creative mindset, again, going back to that idea of being curious about what is possible as opposed to, a quote I'll forget now. The idea of not creating from the past, but creating from possibility of the future, because I think when we go back to the planning exercise and the architecture exercise, a lot of times we are designing from our experience of the past and not pulling forward enough of what's possible in the future and opening up to that potentiality. I think this is, to me, this is the joy of working with Hogan's Alley Society, is that there's always big thinking. And as sometimes, you get to a design phase and then the board gets together and they're like, well, what about this? And that is such a not normal process when it comes to a development project in Vancouver specifically, that it does take some unlearning to get used to. But at the end, when I look at the outcome of that process, it's remarkable. It's truly remarkable. And I wonder what Vancouverites will think of this moment. What will people remember about this moment where Hogan's Alley starts to sprout again and become this
Yeah.
incredible, enlivened community?
Yeah, I hope it's an inspiration for people to, one, come be a part of it, but two, also think about what they would like to see, other things they would like to see in the community, and that okay, like what is possible, thinking outside the box of what is possible. And I think going back, actually, like the question around policy and the role of government, a big thing in our approach is we're not just creating like units, we're building units. We're
Yes.
not just building like house or a home, like we want to also be building community.
Yes.
And like design standards often aren't aligned with building community. They're aligned with,
Often, yes.
maximizing.
Highest best use.
Yes.
Highest best use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so government policy being willing to prioritize community building or whatever is identified by the community as a priority above, having that flexibility, I think would go a long way to combating isolation, which
Mhm.
we think about like
Oh,
the epidemic of loneliness that we have
yes.
in our society. We need to be doing things differently to ensure that we're addressing that. And the big part of that is where people live, how they're engaging with people. Do they have space and opportunity? And are these spaces designed in a way where they will facilitate people coming together and supporting each other and being in community with each other? Because if we go far back into our roots as human beings, we lived in communities and villages.
Yeah. Big work to do, but
Yes.
I think you are a model for doing that work. And when you, I mean, it's a big task. I remember when we first met and you told me what you were going to do and Hogan's Alley Society as the executive director. I'm like, oh my God. Okay. Like, okay. Okay, Djaka. Sure. Let me know if I can help. And here we are, right? And here we
Yeah.
are. The dream is real. And so what carries you in this work? Like, we talk a lot about our ancestors. You talked a lot about community and the inspiration those community voices have given you. But mentors, ancestors, when we do community engagement, specifically with Black and Indigenous communities, the idea of standing on the shoulders of others, carrying that tradition from our ancestors, it's not just a nice thing that you hear. It's very much grounded in the work that people do when they come to the table to have dialogue about belonging, about community, and that sort of thing. In your personal life, are there ancestors or mentors or specific community voices that inspire you and carry you through this heavy lifting and this big work?
Yeah. Um, Early on in my career, I had opportunity of having like really great mentors. I think one in particular, her name's Amal Umar. She's in Calgary, but also led a lot of work around services for immigrants, for women, especially immigrant women. And some of the lessons I learned was knowing your social location, acknowledging power dynamics. I was working in government and was, as a young person, the importance of recognizing very quickly the power dynamics that existed with me representing government when I entered spaces with community, and being taught that my role was to be part of the community and working together with community to advance the work that
Mhm.
community wanted to do instead of pushing down what government wanted to see. And I think that approach has stayed with me throughout my work over the years in different forms of as a funder primarily, but also as a community builder. It's like, how can I connect people to resources, connect people together? How can I be part of the process and use access to platforms or decision making tables that I might have to help advance what community is wanting and creating seats at decision making tables for voices that are not being heard. So that's the type of focus I have over the years fought to create seats at decision making, change who's making decisions altogether
Yeah.
and whose voices are being centered in the work that we're doing. Those are the people that inspire me and continue to inspire me.
That's amazing, Jacko. I want to flash forward, let's say 10 years. Hogan's Alley is 10, 15 years. It's thriving. What do you hope it would feel like to spend a day in Hogan's Alley?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. That is so exciting. So,
Let's manifest it.
yeah, I think I would love to go there and you see people you recognize, because you've gone back there enough because it's somewhere you're drawn to go. And it's also because people are being drawn there. So I know if I go to Hogan's Alley, I'm going to see people I know, people, friends, you know, extended kind of community and family. I go there and there's smells and
Mm.
of food and products that is familiar and new as well, right? Like I think it's an opportunity to engage with things that you've never engaged with, but you're seeing beautiful Black faces in that are like owning a space and saying like, here's what I have to offer, come engage with it, come be a part of it. And you're hearing music and poetry and engaging with art and the laughter of children. I think like for
Mm.
that's getting me emotional, but I think at the end of the day, a healthy space has children laughing, and it also has older generations like seniors being there as well and feeling that they are seen, that they're welcomed, and that they're taken care of, and that their wisdom that they bring is cherished. And so all of those pieces I think is what I would love to see in Hogan's Alley and in the future developments that we're doing, because
Yeah.
we want to be partnering with other organizations to go beyond just the Hogan's Alley block, but to be able to create these spaces across Metro Vancouver. The Black population is growing the fastest growing and largest Black population is in Surrey.
Mm.
So
Wow. Okay.
working with organizations out there so that we can be creating more spaces out there that are meeting the needs of community as well.
Yeah. I love the sound of children laughing. It just like, yes, I can hear it. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, you've come a long way, Hogan's Alley Society and you as executive director personally, and still got a lot of work to do. What's giving you some hope right now?
Oh my gosh. Lots of things are giving me hope. I see I have amazing people on our team, amazing volunteers. I think every time I engage with someone and we're talking about Hogan's Alley, people are excited by it. And whether or not they're involved in it or not, there's that excitement there. And that gives a lot of hope to keep moving forward. I have hope because we are seeing progress. We are, if I think back of like where things started and where this organization started to where we are now, there's like been great accomplishments and things that we can celebrate and that we've been able to accomplish. And we have big dreams. We're going to be developing a 100-year strategic plan. And so we need community to help inform that. And because we're really building for a long future for Black community presence and thriving in our community.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I hope you get the support and love and the joy that comes from community to help lift you up in times that are not always easy and feel a little heavy. And I couldn't be more grateful, Djaka, to have you on the podcast and share this experience with us, with me. It's been such a joy, and what an incredible gift it has been to work with Hogan's Alley Society. And thank you so much for your generosity of time. And I look forward to, walking through Hogan's Alley and eating my delicious flaky patty and listening to children laughing and playing. And yeah, I think it's what a beautiful initiative. And I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you so much for sharing this vision with us at the Happitecture podcast, and all the best.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your generosity in supporting myself and our organization in our efforts, and looking forward to continuing to work together.
Absolutely. My pleasure and privilege. Thanks, Djaka. Have a great day.
You too.
For more information on this or any other episodes of the Happitecture podcast, you can find us at happitecture.com. HAPPITECTURE.com.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Happitecture podcast. Thanks to our sponsor, Cora Architecture and Interiors, creating spaces for your well-being. The Happitecture podcast is produced by Janessa Klatt.